So am I crazy, or would the Atlas Gundam make a perfect base for Sekai Kamiki's next custom Gunpla? Hey guys, welcome to Channel 2S, your home for Gunpla news, reviews, and more. I'm your host, Second Soundwave, and today we're taking a look at the completed high-grade Gundam Atlas. So we're going to shake things up today and start this off by comparing the high-grade Gundam Atlas to the high-grade Universal Century Gundam Revive version. And seeing them together like this is pretty interesting because it really highlights the differences in aesthetic that Gundam Thunderbolt has. The Atlas Gundam is very lanky, it's quite tall as well. It's about a head taller than the original Gundam, which is pretty much the normal 18 meters. And in general, the Atlas Gundam is something that's just going to really stand out if you put this guy in with a bunch of normal UC leads. And unique and different really are the best words you can use to describe the Atlas Gundam. Love it or hate it, this guy is a very different Gundam, and while he does keep all the basic Gundam traits, everything else about him has a really unique, distinctive look to it, from the colors to the design itself. There is a ton of detail on this kit for a high grade, whether you're looking at it from the front or the back, and I was really impressed with how this kit looked once it was all put together. And I really like the colors they chose for this model. The white they used is a very bright, pure white that stands out quite sharply against the more sort of dirty green off-white that was used for kits like the RX-78. The super dark navy blue that's used for the other half of this model contrasts the white very nicely, and I love the shade of yellow they used. It's almost got a bit of orange to it, and it looks fantastic with the other two colors. Now, of course, this is a Thunderbolt model, and that means that unfortunately there are a few stickers involved. The yellow stripe that runs along the edge of the chest is a sticker, and so are the yellow stripes running down the side of the abdomen. This stripe, and this stripe are all stickers. There are circular stickers with yellow lines around them on the inside and outside of both the arms and the legs. There's a large yellow seal running down the figure's spine. And then finally there are the standard eye stickers on the head. Now, because of how many stickers this model uses, it is very easy to just write this off as a kit with terrible color separation, but it really isn't, because while there are some areas that use stickers, there are other areas that have really surprising levels of separation for a high-grade model. Take this little yellow chevron on his chest, for example. That's actually a separate piece underneath the armor. The yellow vents on his cheeks are also separate pieces of plastic, and it is extremely rare to see colored vents on a model this small. All the yellow trim on the upper and lower leg armor is provided by pieces with no stickers used to accent them at all. In fact, aside from the circles on the knees, the only stickers on the legs of this model are these two gray stripes that run down the side. All the yellow on the lower body is pretty much just plastic separation. The Atlas Gundam just looks great from all angles, and if you want to make him look even better, you do get a sheet of pretty awesome looking marking seals that I'm probably going to put on this guy at some point in the future, because there's some really neat looking stuff here. Now, as we move on to the articulation, we must face probably the biggest talking point of this model, and that is the fact that it uses absolutely no polycaps whatsoever. This means that every joint connection on this kit is simply two pieces of polystyrene plugged together. Many older models that use this method of construction had a tendency to loosen up severely over time. However, there are a few recent models in Iron-Blooded Orphans that only use 4 or 5 polycaps, and I've had pretty good experiences with those, so I'm going to have to wait and see how this guy holds up over time. So starting up at the top, I've actually removed the head completely because this guy has a really funky joint construction here, and I want you guys to get a good look at this. Basically, there's a hinge down at the base, and then there's another hinge in the middle of the neck, and then a ball joint on top, and that's what the head plugs down onto. So what you end up with is a kit that can look really far up and really far down. Of course, you can also do the usual 360-degree rotation. And now we come to the arms. The shoulders are on a swing-up joint similar to that used on the Revive models. It allows the shoulder itself to come up to here. And it's a good thing he has that because underneath the shoulder pad, the arm can only move out about 45 degrees. The shoulder itself is on a ball joint, which means you get a little bit of limited rotary cuff movement and also a full rotation. There is a bicep swivel below the shoulder, as is pretty much the norm nowadays. As you might expect from the design of the arms, he has a very deep double-jointed elbow. And below that, he has his wrists. Now, the wrists are the first point where the polycapless build kind of is a detriment, because his hands are fine right now, but if you move them out of that little locking point, they are pretty loose, and if you want to tip his hand like this, it gets pretty floppy. And also the way the joint's built is a little weird in that it actually has a pretty long stem on the hand, and it goes really deep into the arm. And that's not really something that affects the articulation, it's just kind of weird, and just in general, I think the wrists are probably the weakest point of this guy's articulation on the main body. Now, speaking of the main body, this guy's torso movement is incredible. So there's 2 joints on the spine back here, which means you can actually rotate his body back pretty darn far. And that combined with his neck movement means he can pretty much look straight up in the air. Then underneath the torso there's actually a hinge that allows the whole thing to swing forwards, and that allows him to look all the way down. And already that is an awesome level of torso movement for a high grade, but we're not even done yet because his entire torso is on a pivot head's base that gives him a great level of side-to-side movement. And of course he still has a full 360 at the waist itself. The front skirts do rotate up and can be separated, however I would recommend it against it as there is not a lot holding these in. It's a similar situation to the ground GM in that sense. And once you have the front skirt up, his leg can come forward really far, and even though the back skirts are static, because of how thin his legs are, you can actually get them back pretty far. And because of his design, there is absolutely nothing stopping this guy from doing a full split. But if you thought the crazy articulation was done, you'd be wrong because this guy has freaking swing forward hips. And once you have the hips swung down, he can do a freaking front to back split. How many high grades can do this? I can't think of any. Now below the insanity of this guy's hips, we do have a thigh swivel that goes around 180 degrees. And his knee bend is just as good as it looks. And now we've made our way all the way down to the feet, and holy crap, this guy's feet are amazing. So there's a bunch of joints down here. There's a front to back hinge, there's a swivel right here, there's a little pivot on the back piece here, a pivot on the front piece, and a little bit of a toe movement as well. So altogether you can get this guy to point his foot down this far, up this far, with enough of a toe bend to get his foot pretty much flat on the ground even if he's lying face down. And a level of ankle pivot that is so extreme, you can keep his feet flat on the ground no matter what you're doing with him. And even seeing all the official images of this model was not enough to prepare me for just how freaking fun this kid is to pose. Basically, if you can think of a pose, this guy can pull it off, no ifs, ands, or buts. And here's one final pose, and I'm going to cut myself off here because if I don't, I'm going to be posing this thing all afternoon, and I need to get onto the accessories, so let's go ahead and do that. So the first of the Atlas Gundam's weapons is actually already stored right on the model. If you take the shoulder pad and you just kind of lift up this little section right here, you can see there's a little beam saber handle in there. And you get 2 of these beam saber handles, 1 for each shoulder, and of course you do also get a pair of clear pink blades for them. They look great, it's really fun to pose them with them. However, there is a bit of a problem with them where in addition to his wrists being really loose, like I mentioned in the articulation section, the beam sabers themselves have very small handles, so there's really not much holding them in his hands. You kind of have to work with gravity here. The next weapon you get after the beam sabers are a pair of submachine guns, and these are very simple weapons, and they look pretty cool. They do need a bit of painting. They're not supposed to be solid gray. There's supposed to be some other colors in there, but for the most part they look pretty darn awesome. Now the pegs for the guns are not super secure, so they do rattle around just a little bit, but because of the way the hand wraps around the handle, there's no way for them to actually come out, so they should be pretty secure no matter how you decide to pose them. Now if everything I've shown you so far was all you'd get with the Atlas Gundam, this kit would still be an absolute 10 out of 10. However, there are a few other accessories that I haven't quite covered yet. So the first of these accessories is this thing. Now you get one of these for each side of the model, and these are basically supposed to be some kind of articulated sub-leg flotation devices. They're pretty crazy. They've got thrusters at the top and bottom, and you can rotate these around on these little rotation joints. The arms themselves can also move in a few points. There is a hinge right here, and then a hinge here. There's a swivel at the base, and then there's also a swivel and a hinge up here at the top, so you can get quite a lot of movement out of these. You can also rotate these bottom sections individually or as a single unit. And you attach these onto the kit by just plugging them over those big white pegs that are over his hips. And once you have the sub-legs attached, they do make him look pretty silly. There are a bunch of different ways you can display these. There's a bunch of different joints, of course, so you could maybe, rotate these up more if you want to and kind of have them up on his back. However, the problem with that is, of course, it makes him really back heavy. But the really great thing about these sub-legs is where they're placed on his body, because they're actually attached to his waist below the torso, which means that they're no longer hanging off his back like these kind of weapons would be on another model. So you can move his torso around still, you can make him look up, you can make him look down, and you don't have to worry about these things hanging off his back and weighing the kit down as you're trying to put him into an awesome pose. However, the sub-legs aren't perfect, as they're probably the part of this kit that suffers the most from the lack of polycaps. When you try to rotate this section right here, it has a very loose feel to it, and it will definitely not be able to hold the kit up in some poses. Also, when you swing these sections around, they have a very kind of, not really, I don't want to say cheap feeling, but they feel a lot looser than parts on a kit really should be. And this is just, in general, probably the first thing you'd want to tighten up with maybe some floor polish or something if you decide to pick up this model. But these sublegs aren't just here to hang off his hips and make him look silly. They do actually have a pretty awesome major function to them. So if you get the sublegs into a position somewhat similar to this, you'll notice that there's a pair of little clips right here in the bottom, and they happen to line up awfully nicely with a pair of slots on his heels. And once you attach the feet to the sublegs, you get this thing. Now at first I thought this was supposed to be some kind of water ski mode when I originally saw the pictures. Then I watched the anime and apparently this allows him to fly around. It's silly, it's stupid, and it's also super freaking cool. Of course, it would look even cooler if this guy was up in the air, so Bandai does give you this little action base adapter, and this just kind of slides over his butt and clips over the back skirt just like this, and you can take any kind of action base or stand and just plug it in right there and put him up in the air. So once you have the sub-arms attached to his legs like this, you do actually still have a little bit of movement. You can actually still move the legs forward and back like this. You can't really move them out that much further than here just because there's not a lot of hinge movement here. But because of the way the sub-arms are jointed, you can actually bend his legs just a little bit as long as you're careful and you're conscious of how everything's moving and where the joints are. So you can get a small but still fairly passable level of mobility out of the legs. So after the sub-arms, this guy has just a couple more weapons, and the first of them is his railgun. Now the railgun comes in two pieces. There's this part that you slide down into his hand, and there's this piece that you basically just kind of clip in from underneath, and it sort of locks it around the bottom. So once you have the railgun in his hands, it looks pretty much like this. And does he have weight issues with this? Well, kind of, I guess. I mean, I could certainly see this loosening up over time, but right now, when you put this in his hand, your biggest problem is probably just going to be balancing him and countering the weight of the giant weapon. But once you have it in there, it's actually pretty secure, and even the wrists end up not being that much of a problem because that piece that wraps around the underside kind of braces it against his arm and keeps it from flopping around. So you can actually get him into quite a few poses just pretty much just free on the ground without a stand, and that's really impressive for such a heavy weapon. Here's another pose with the railgun, and again, if you just take your time and kind of reposition the feet, you can actually get this guy to stand pretty securely while he's holding it. The only problem I have now with the railgun is the fact that it looks literally nothing like the one he used in the animation. Now when it comes to big, clunky, cumbersome weapons, this guy is more than just sub-arms and a railgun. He also has a shield. Now the shield itself is pretty detailed. It's got this really cool diamond pattern running across the gray parts. There's also some raised white sections on it. The underside's pretty blank though, but that's kind of to be expected. And as you can see, there isn't really an arm port for this. You kind of just wrap it around his hand and hope for the best. And of course, because of the weight of that combined with the loose wrists, if you wrap it around his hand like this, the result is of course not that impressive. Not to mention that if you move it around a little bit, it'll probably knock his hand completely off because this whole thing's resting on that little hand connection in there. It's not a very sturdy attachment. Or is it? Because apparently Bandai was fully aware that this guy would not be able to hold his shield, so what they did is they made this little brace piece that you plug onto the bottom of his arm, and then that has a little tab that goes into the handle of this piece, and that holds this thing on, not super securely. I don't want to bump this around too much, but it is a much sturdier connection than just his hand. So if you take it like this and you shake it around, this thing isn't going anywhere. And with everything attached to the Atlas Gundam all at once, not only can he barely fit in my light box, but he also looks absolutely badass. But if you thought you'd already seen everything the Atlas Gundam can do, you'd be dead wrong because this guy has a freaking boat. So in order to transform the Atlas Gundam into its boat mode, what you have to do is basically bring the sub legs forward so they're kind of positioned like this, and then you take the shield and you want to remove the handle first, and then you take these two grooves on the side and you want to slide them into these two pegs right here. And you want to do this with the diagonal side of the slider facing towards the larger side of the sub leg. So you just plug one side in like this, and you bring it around, you plug the other side in like this. And then once you have those three pieces connected together, you basically just rotate the sub arms down and get him to the point where he's kind of lying flat down on that whole assembly. And you have a Gundam on a freaking boat. Never in the past would I have ever dreamed this was something I wanted, but now I can never look at other Gundams the same way again. But seriously though, the boat mode on this guy is so freaking cool. You don't even have to have him lying down when he's in the boat. You can stand him up. You can even have his hips twisted slightly because of the way the arms are articulated. You can actually get a little bit of hip movement out of it. So you could have him kind of planted forward in his boat. You could throw some weapons on here, have him charging into battle against some Gogs, and have him looking super freaking amazing. And finally, after God knows how long, we have reached the end of things the Atlas Gundam can do. And at this point, do I really have to say any more? Of course you know I'm going to give this kid a big thumbs up. The articulation is fantastic. His weapons look like they could be a problem. They look like they're going to cause weight issues. They look like he's not going to be able to hold them, but then he holds them really well. He's got some great smaller weapons too. The sub-legs are really weak and they can be kind of a pain in the ass when you're posing him, but if you take them off while you're posing him and then stick them on later on, or just leave them off completely and pose the individual model, it's a much more manageable experience and a lot more fun. Yes, he does have a few more stickers than he needs, but there's also some parts of this kit that have really incredible color separation. And all of that, combined with the fact that this is one of the most unique looking Gundams we've ever gotten, makes this a model that I recommend to absolutely everybody. This is just a really cool, awesome model. I'd love to see what the customizing community ends up doing with this. And I'm already thinking this might very well end up being my favorite kit of 2017. Or at the very least, my favorite high grade. But that's all for tonight, guys. So, as always, remember to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and share it around with your friends in the Gunpla community to show them just how awesome the Atlas Gundam is. And if this is your first time on Channel 2S and you're not subscribed already, be sure you hit that subscribe button for more awesome Gunpla content delivered to your sub box on as close to a daily basis as I can cope with. And also hit the notification bell because YouTube doesn't always believe you when you press that subscribe button, and you really do mean it when you press that subscribe button. Also, I do live stream sometimes, and that notification bell will tell you when I'm live, so you don't want to miss that. And as always, I'm Second Soundwave, the Atlas is awesome, and I'll see you next time.